What do you think about graphic novels? Have you read any? There's a bunch of them. From your usual superhero fare to deeply personal accounts by the authors and artists behind them. And, as any media that has existed for a long time, it has evolved. In, created by cartoonist Will McPhail, is a graphic novel that was released last year and, in my humble opinion, one of 2021's best books. The story follows Nick, a millennial hovering through life, numb by his work and struggling to make a connection with anyone he crosses paths with, while aimlessly exploring the city. Trying out the different ironically named coffee shops in this urban jungle saturated with loneliness. It's almost as if he's trying to live life by imitating stuff he's seen or heard in fiction. He enters a random bar, expecting the bartender to say, "Rough day," so Nick can deliver his previously rehearsed answer. In another scene, Nick gets caught drawing a girl in the subway. Thinking his artistry will be appreciated, he tries to explain the gesture, but the situation doesn't turn out as he expected. He visits a coffee shop, thinking the barista will read his mind and give him his favorite drink, but he gets an espresso instead. He's left staring down at the small, insignificant cup. The story moves forward as we see how Nick tries, and fails, to bridge a gap between him and everyone he knows. His neighbor, Sarah, who he usually encounters outside his apartment. Ren, a quirky woman he recently met and is interested in. And even his own mother, Hannah, who he helps by fixing up an apartment in his spare time. The tone of the story is accompanied by McPhail's odd and smart sense of humor. He constantly makes fun of social conventions and implies that nothing is too sacred to escape the reach of his sharp comedy. This is present in the visual gags that surround the protagonist's life and the witty and sarcastic dialogue that encompasses most of the conversations in this graphic novel. A lot of the comedy is delivered through the perfectly placed moments of silence, the characters' expressive eyes saying much more than words ever could. McPhail is a master at this. The illustrations, presented in black and white, help visualize Nick's mundane sense of existence. He's one of many people, alone in a big, grey city, where the only businesses that seem to exist are coffee shops and bars that serve handcrafted beer. Life is colorless here. The plot, just as Nick's existence, seems to wander off, showing only glimpses of his life without a clearly cut storyline. But at 1/5 of the graphic novel's 260 pages, something interesting happens. Nick discovers a leaking problem in his apartment, so he sends for a plumber that can help fix it. The guy, named Steve, arrives and starts doing his thing. Meanwhile, in his mind, Nick tries to figure out how can he make a connection with this stranger. How can he reach out to him? How can he get over the obstacles of small talk and have a meaningful conversation with the person fixing his toilet? How can he succeed where he has failed so many times before? He begins with the customary stuff. They tell each other about their jobs, but the conversation seems to be dangerously heading into usual territory. Nick is starting to panic. He will fail again to entice a genuine human emotion. He thinks one thing, but says another. He, again, is afraid to cross that line. Nick seems to be moving farther and farther away from the man fixing his toilet. He's losing Steve. This encounter is going to end up being just like all the others, after all. No. Words that matter, Nick thinks to himself. Say something important, genuine, and then he does exactly that. I feel embarrassed about myself around people like you, Steve, Nick confesses. The scene almost freezes. They awkwardly stare at each other, silently. The tension is almost unbearable for Nick. And then we see it. A small splash of color. Steve replies, "I feel like that sometimes." This is the image on the next page. Nick and the reader are presented with a gorgeous landscape in full color, the black and white completely left behind, and the view is breathtaking. Nick takes in a mouthful of air and then exhales. He starts to explore, barefoot, this new place. As he does this, he takes in every bit of the scenery. He climbs, stumbles, and continues. This is new territory for him, and it is as strange as it is exhilarating. Nick looks up at the peak of the mountain in front of him and notices something, barely out of sight. What is it? When more of the strange shape starts to reveal itself, the experience ends. The mirage vanishes. Steve has finished his job and has to go. Both men bid each other farewell. Nick closes the door and says to himself, "What the f***?" This is the point in the story where the true plot of the graphic novel is laid bare to the reader. So, what the f***? In a world where true human connection is hard to find, Will McPhail shows us that there is a secret realm between us and each person we come in contact with. A hidden place that is hard but not impossible to reach. He tells us that we can find this place if we use words that matter. In an interview with The Guardian, McPhail said, "All the time, I find myself in conversations where I am saying things that I don't care about, or even mean, just to join in the performance. It's when I can tell that the other person is doing it too. That makes you think, what are we doing? Who are we performing for?" About what inspired his graphic novel, he explains, "I've always been fascinated by how combinations of letters and words can change the mechanics of a conversation, and turn it from one completely different thing into another. When that's happened to me, on the rare occasions, I've been transported into this other person's world." The book was an attempt to describe that feeling. A study made in 2021 by the Making Caring Common project, run by Harvard University, claims that around 36% of respondents reported feeling lonely frequently or all of the time. From this figure, 61% are people between 18 and 25 years of age. The latest Signal Loneliness Index claims that nearly half of Americans always feel alone or left out. Statista performed a survey in different countries to measure loneliness. These were the results. In countries like Peru, Chile, South Korea, Malaysia, South Africa, Italy, Saudi Arabia, India, Turkey, and Brazil, more than half of the people surveyed claim that they often or always feel lonely. After this first encounter, Nick goes through a series of events that will change his life forever. An exploration ignited by the much-needed act of listening to what others have to say. There are many more places that Nick will explore. You'll have to read this book if you want to know more. To find meaningful connections, the author of this graphic novel shows us, in a subtle and nuanced manner, that the first and most important step to take is to practice empathy. When we realize that the world doesn't revolve around us, we may, just as Nick, discover a new realm that has been hiding right in front of our eyes. In his book, The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, John Koenig has coined several peculiar words. One that caught my attention was sonder, which is beautifully defined as the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own, populated with their own ambitions, friends, routines, worries, and inherent craziness. An epic story that continues invisibly around you like an anthill sprawling deep underground, with elaborate passageways to thousands of other lives that you'll never know existed, in which you might appear only once, as an extra sipping coffee in the background, as a blur of traffic passing on the highway, as a lighted window at dusk. Puts things into perspective, doesn't it? Another unique aspect about Inn is that the location itself feels like a character. When the satirization of the millennial lifestyle is not present, the places where Nick wanders aimlessly give off an atmosphere of loneliness and absence, which totally contrasts with the colorful landscapes Nick witnesses later in the story. The city in this graphic novel feels similar to the work of Edward Hopper, a painter who managed to visually articulate that peculiar, cold feeling present in big cities. His paintings help visualize the sensation one experiences when living in a place devoid of acquaintances or loved ones. A place conformed only by windows and straight lines. A place where the person becomes part of the scenery, where individual and space become one and the same. Nan Goldin is best known for her portraits of the gay subculture during the 70s and 80s, as well as the AIDS crisis of the 90s. Her work is usually very intimate. defined by an approach that can only be achieved by having a real connection with her subjects. Many of the people in her photographs were her friends or lovers. By the 1990s, most of them were dead due to HIV. But there is another side of her work. By carrying her camera virtually everywhere, Goldin captured the landscapes of both the city and its surrounding areas. This perspective presents either isolated characters in city spaces or completely empty places that could very well be situated in another world entirely. Relating to her body of work, the photographer declared, "I used to think that I could never lose anyone if I photographed them enough." In her non-fiction, semi-autobiographical book, Olivia Lane reflects on the isolation present in urban settings. The first page opens with the following. The city reveals itself as a set of cells, 100,000 windows, some darknet and some flooded with green or white or golden light. Inside, strangers swim to and fro, attending to the business of their private hours. You can see them, but you can't reach them. And so this commonplace urban phenomenon, available in any city of the world on any night, conveys to even the most social a tremor of loneliness. It's an easy combination of separation and exposure. Cities can be lonely places, and in admitting this, we see that loneliness doesn't necessarily require physical solitude, but rather an absence or paucity of connection, closeness, kinship, an inability, for one reason or another, to find as much intimacy as is desired. Lying uses her own experience living in New York City to tackle the work of several artists and how they use art to cope with feelings of loneliness and alienation, how they infuse their words and images with a sensation that everyone can relate to. I like to think that Nick would probably like some of these artists. It is likely he would see himself in some of their work. Further ahead into the book, Lying makes an insightful remark. She says, "Interesting, the idea that loneliness might be taking you towards an otherwise unreachable experience of reality." This sentence, for me, explains exactly what Will McPhail's graphic novel is about. The search for something new, something meaningful, in the face of utter despair and desolation. It is this loneliness that prompts Nick to keep pushing, sometimes with hilarious and awkward results, until he finds what he's looking for. A doorway into a place previously unknown to him, a place of empathy. The world is big and full of people, each of them struggling in their own ways. This graphic novel shows us that if we take enough time and say the right words, that struggle can become so much more bearable. It reveals us that there's still so much more to explore, so much more to discover. If you do, you'll hopefully get to visit different beautiful places, huge mountains, maybe even a lush jungle or a deserted city. Hopefully, you'll find someone that launches you into this amazing journey. Hopefully, you'll find your own Steve. Thanks for watching. I am Curious Robin.